Tomorrow is the first time that I'm going to be a teaching attending on the academic team, and I'm both very excited for this, but also a little bit nervous. One of the reasons that I'm excited is because this is basically one of the things that I've always been looking forward to ever since doing my third year medical student rotations. I just always loved that team structure. I loved, presenting in front of the whole team and just having a discussion about the patient together. Like, that was such an exciting part of medical school for me. One of the things that makes me a little nervous about it, though, is there is a chance, that I actually don't like being the attending on the service. And maybe I don't actually like it. This whole time I've been kind of going towards this trajectory saying I want to continue doing academic medicine. I want to be on the teaching teams as much as possible. And there is a little bit of a part in the back of my head which is kind of like, oh, what if I go through this next week and it turns out I don't like it? Then it would be like my whole world will have imploded because I will not really I'll have no idea what I want to do next, essentially. I think I probably will enjoy it still. I mean, I went through all of residency in this team-based format and I just loved it every single time. But being removed from that for the past year, I've done a whole year of pretty much solo attendingship. And now going back into it, it does make me a little bit apprehensive. Like, wow, I've been out of it for a whole year now. What's it going to be like when I step back into this world? The other thing that I'm a little nervous about is, taking care of the team appropriately as the attending. You're the big boss now in terms of everything kind of ends with you or stops with you. And you have the final call on everything. You have to try and make sure everybody's doing well on the team and that people are feeling like the decisions that are being made are correct, and just kind of dealing with a lot of people and making sure that everybody is feeling supported on the team. In terms of knowledge-wise too, right after the end of third year of residency, I feel like that's when you feel the most confident, actually. And part of it is because you're still practicing under attending, but also that's like the key part of your training where you are still living, eating, sleeping, and breathing medicine. And over this past year of being an attending, you are not as involved in medicine anymore. And so there is an element of, man, what if I have lost some medical knowledge that I may have had before? Now, I don't think this will have happened. I do think I've tried my best to keep up to date with everything. I like making these videos on YouTube and everything. And so I feel like I have a lot of things to share with the medical students, interns, and the residents. But there is still that part where it's like, man, I used to be pretty much doing this my entire day, in the entire month. And it's kind of a different feeling back then when you are literally devoting 90% of your time to medicine, whereas now, I'm focused on a lot of other things outside of medicine as well. I think no matter what stage of training you're in, you're always going to have this element of imposter syndrome, and it really just never goes away until you've felt yourself be in a role for a long enough time. So you've proven to yourself that you've been able to do it. One of the other things that I'm hoping to balance over this next week as a teaching attending is striking that perfect balance between giving autonomy to the resident work team and the senior resident and not being too overbearing, and also striking the right balance between teaching enough to the students and the residents, but also not being too overboard with it where they're kind of getting too inundated with facts and it's slowing them down. One of the things that I prepped for my team for tomorrow is quickly just writing down some of my expectations for the academic team. And this not only helps them know what I'm looking for, but also it helps me, just writing it down so I have a clear sense of what I want to achieve with this team over this next week. And a lot of this has been adapted from expectations that I had written before for medical students and for interns. But I kind of just distilled it all into this one document that I can hand out to them and that they can refer back to while they're in their workroom. So the first topic is that I would like us to do bedside rounding on most patients. And the reason I put this at the top is because I feel like this is a little bit more of a controversial topic, and a lot of residents don't like bedside rounding. They really prefer table rounding. But I kind of want to prioritize this as something that we try to do. And so this is another thing that I'm a little bit nervous about because I know it requires getting some buy-in from the residents. But I do feel like if it's done well, it really works extremely well. So I talked about how it's been shown to be more efficient than table rounds or hallway rounds via this pilot program at UNC. And I've talked about this in videos in the past, but if you take a look at this document, you can see they did a time motion study. And this is how much time they were spending before, and they tracked whether it was in the hallway or inside the patient's room or while walking. And then after they implemented this bedside rounding, you can see that it actually improved the efficiency of rounds. So that's a really great article I always love referring back to. It improves patient satisfaction. It doubles the amount of learning for students and interns. And this was always an important one for me because by the end of intern year, the patient load sometimes was pretty low, and I'd be like, man, I feel like I'm not getting as much learning as I could, if I had potentially been able to see what's going on with my co-interns' patients. And obviously I was listening in and everything, but it's a different thing to actually see the patient, hear about their story, and see what they look like as they start to get better. And so by doing bedside rounding, I do feel like it really doubles or even triples the amount of learning for students and interns. Students only carrying 2 or 3 patients, and all of a sudden they're seeing 9 or 10. Even if they're not directly following them, they definitely get a sense for how these patients are responding to treatments and kind of what our main treatments are for these patients. I think everything sticks a little bit better. I think overall the learning is more engaging, especially with patient communication. Seeing how people interact with patients is helpful for me, so I can try and steer it the right way. And also for other people to see my communication style and if they think I have things to improve on, or if they have things they would want to emulate as well. It's always useful to see how other people interact with patients. And then, of course, physical exams. If there's ever an interesting physical exam finding, everybody can listen to it together. Everyone is on the same page during bedside rounding, so you don't have that situation where attendings come back in the afternoon and completely change the plan after they see the patient. And that creates a lot of extra work for the residents later on. That was always one of my pet peeves as a resident. And so by doing bedside rounding all at the same time, everybody sees the same thing, the plan is made right then and there, and then there really should be minimal changes after that. And I'm gonna have to be very careful about trying not to tweak the plan too much in the afternoon, because it's gonna cause a lot of chaos for the residents and add a bunch of work to their list. So that's another thing I'll have to kind of try and give them some more autonomy on. I think a little bit of stress presenting and answering questions in front of a patient is a good thing. And I also had some tips here. So bringing a workstation on wheels or a computer on rounds can be very helpful. I like doing that as a senior resident because then you can help put orders in while you're rounding. And then I also just had some guidelines that if we ever exceed 8 to 10 minutes in the room, it's time to tell the patient we have to leave, but we'll be back if there's any further questions. And if the interns are not presenting a patient, then they can go step out to return pages or call consults or anything in order to improve their workflow. The next big expectation that I'd like to set is that rounds should be a low stakes environment. And one of the things I really wanted the students and the interns to know is that I really do like to ask a lot of questions on rounds, but the main reason that I ask them is to test their knowledge. And I feel like getting those PIMP questions really helps reinforce your learning. Anytime you get a PIMP question, whether or not you get it right or wrong, it always sticks so much better. You always remember. I have PIMP questions that I received as a medical student that I still remember to this day. And I remember exactly, what the situation was and who the attending was that asked me it. Because, getting that little bit of pressure does help you remember things better. And also, asking questions is a great way to find out where the boundary of our students or interns' knowledge is. And then once we find that boundary, we can stretch it just a little bit further and just try and expand it a little bit. And so that's also another reason I like to ask a lot of questions. But I also like to always let them know that my evaluations are never based on how many questions that they can answer or their level of medical knowledge. We all have different baselines of medical knowledge, and there are things that some people have been exposed to that other people haven't. So for example, maybe one medical student has seen COPD 3 times already. The other medical student hasn't seen it a single time. And so it's unfair to judge them just based on their prior experiences with COPD. They may have just been exposed more than the other student. So regardless, what I really base my evaluation off of is having that positive attitude, being receptive to feedback, and then, trying to make an effort to actually act on that feedback, and then being an engaged learner. That's always what an attending always wants, is somebody who's engaged, who seems interested in learning, and is just willing to be a sponge. That's kind of what we take the most pride in, or at least I feel like I do, if somebody really wants to be that person who's just taking in all that knowledge. There is no such thing as a dumb question, and it will never affect my evaluation of you. I want to be an open book that any students, they shouldn't feel intimidated or worried about asking me any kind of question that they want. I know that as a medical student, I had a lot of times where I wanted to ask questions to the residents or to the attendings, but I just kind of held it in, and then I would like try and secretly look it up later, but still not find the answer. I was worried it was going to be a dumb question, and then, they would knock me off on my evaluation for asking dumb questions. And honestly, I think that's one of the reasons I did really well in medical school is because I didn't ask a lot of questions. So sometimes people just assume you know a lot more when you're not asking questions. But for me, I want them to feel free to ask those questions so I can answer them and help them expand their knowledge right on the spot. Another big priority for me is that I want everybody to keep their presentations short. So I preface it that I try to interrupt as little as possible. I want them to know that, just because if I'm not saying anything, it's not because I'm, judging them or, there's not some ulterior motive. I just don't want to interrupt them. I want them to finish their whole presentation, and then I'll jump into it a little bit later. And then I want them to kind of tell the patient what we're going to be doing. Good morning, Mr. Jones. This is your whole medical team. I'm just going to talk briefly about your case, and then there may be some medical jargon, but we will answer any questions that you have afterwards. And then I do want them to include the one-liner. I know there are some students and residents that kind of stop providing the one-liner. But for me, I've always found it helpful. I feel like it helps reorient everybody to the situation at hand, especially other learners on the team who aren't as familiar with the case. Doing that one-liner helps remind everybody what this patient is here for and, what the main important points of their history are. In general, I do believe that presenting faster is better. So I want the students to get through the objective information as quickly as possible. Don't interpret any of the values while they're going through the objective section. Don't add any qualifiers like, I think I heard a murmur, but I'm not sure. Just present, I heard a 3 out of 6 systolic murmur or whatever. And even if you're wrong, then we can correct that when we all do the physical exam. Also for medical students, I want them to pretend that they are the ones making medical decisions. For example, I would like to get a chest x-ray, or I would like to start IV antibiotics. So I think the presentations part is kind of a small thing, but something that I feel is very important. I like to emphasize what I expect from my presentations, because it's very common in medical school that the attendings never really outright say what their expectations are or their preferences are for your presentations. And so you're kind of just, with waffling around, trying to see what works best and what the attendings seem to respond best to. But I think if I'm being a little bit more explicit about it, I want short, concise presentations. I want your one-liner. I want the objective data, and it's fine if you read all of the labs just one by one, just go through them real quick. I honestly think that would have made things so much better when I was a medical student. So I hope this is helpful for the medical students. My last main point is that they should expect feedback and chalk talks. And any feedback that I give is because I'm hoping it is helpful for them to improve. I do want to try to give feedback as immediately as possible. So if somebody does a presentation and I have something to have feedback about it, I want to be writing that on my piece of paper, and right after the presentation, I want to try to address that feedback, because then it sticks. I'm not going to bring it back, 5 days later when I'm writing up their eval, and then the time they read the eval is like 2 or 3 weeks later and nobody remembers the situation anymore. If we can get that on the spot feedback, I think that's much more effective. I want to aim for at least 2 chalk talks per week on topics we see in our patients. Now, I could do more or less, but I do want to strike that right balance of not detracting too much from the residents and the students' learning time, work time, because I don't want them to be staying late and not being able to finish all their tasks on time. So this will obviously be a moving target, but ideally at least 2 chalk talks. And then I do want to make some edits to their notes. I find as residents, we tend to write way too long of notes. We tend to mush 10 different problems into like one problem, and then it's very unclear which problem is being addressed by which treatment. And so from time to time, I feel like I am going to make some edits to their notes. I'm not just going to be doing the addendum only, but I think I will also make some corrections or edits in their actual note. And I think that's going to be a little tedious, but I want to do it every now and then, because then it can sometimes be helpful for them to see what an attending thinks is important to keep in the note. In general, the more concise they can keep the notes, the better, in my opinion. I have some other things that I used to do with medical students on my team, doing this personal and professional goal thing that I used to do with some of my teams. And these may be things that I bring back in the future. We'll see how it goes, because sometimes doing UWorld questions together, it really is a fun activity. And having medical students do short presentations to the team, I feel like is very helpful. It's a good habit for them to get into, because it's going to help them honor all their other rotations. Although, unfortunately, there's no honors at UC Davis now. It's just like pass fail. So I'm not really sure how that's going to work out. But having them do a presentation honestly really helps with the evaluation, because if I'm going to write them a really, really great evaluation, them doing a presentation is an easy point where I can just include that in there, and it makes them seem very proactive. The personal and professional goal is actually a really nice way to learn a little bit more about your team members and kind of hold each other accountable. And I always felt like it was very good for wellness. So it is something I would consider bringing back at some point. There is always a part of me that felt like it was a little bit cringy to kind of bring up this, but honestly, I don't think it's cringy. It takes a little bit of investment, but I think at the end of the week, it really does pay off to have everybody set that personal and professional goal and then follow up with them at the end of the week, how they have done with that. So maybe that is something I will bring back. We'll see. Anyways, one of the main things that I really wish I had as a medical student and an intern was just having these really, really defined expectations. And so I'm hoping that writing this sheet out as something they can refer to can really give them a sense of security about what I actually expect from them and what I'm hoping to achieve on our week together. Maybe transitioning to a teaching attending for the first time is really just going to be like transitioning to a senior resident from the first time. I think that was a huge jump from intern year to senior year. And now jumping from a solo hospitalist to a teaching attending is going to be another one of those big jumps. But, we've all done it before. We've made all these big leaps before. And so that should give us some degree of security that we can accomplish this. And it's not as difficult as we may hype it up to be. And so I'm definitely looking forward to teaching rounds tomorrow. We will see how it goes. I'll hopefully provide an update video for you guys. Let me know down in the comments below if you've had experience going back into becoming a teaching attending and how that transition was for you. Was there anything that was nerve-wracking for you? And did you have imposter syndrome, et cetera, et cetera? So with that said, thanks again for watching. I'll see you in the next video, and peace.